The order to make Earth kneel had already been written, stamped, and sung before a single human heard it. Tutun Ledro watched the words leave the high choir on a beam of folded light, and he felt nothing wrong about it. He was a voice of compliance, third rank, born to the work the way water is born to run downhill. For 900 of his people's years, the Severan Accord had sent the same message to every young world it found. Kneel, be still, join the quiet, and for 900 years, every world had knelt. The message was not made of threats. That was the thing the lesser species never understood, until it was already inside them. The Accord did not bomb, the Accord did not burn. The Accord sang, and the song reached into the soft place behind a mind, and it loosened the grip a creature kept on its own will. The Severan called it the stillness. The conquered called it many things, near the end, when they still had words. Mostly they called it peace, because by then they could not remember wanting anything else. Toon had sung it himself 11 times, 11 worlds. He had stood in 11 sky towers and watched populations set down their tools and their weapons and their old hungers and turn their faces up to the Accord with a calm that he had been taught to read as gratitude. He had been very young at the first one, a world of tall, pale creatures who built their cities into the cliffs of a single great canyon, who had fought the hymn of settling for 19 days with crude rail throwers before the song reached deep enough. Tutun had been a recording apprentice then, allowed only to hold the secondary instruments, and he had watched the 19 days of fighting end, not with a surrender flag, but with a silence, a slow planet-wide quiet, as the song loosened the grip, and the rail throwers stopped firing one by one. He had logged the date. He had logged the first word of yielding, which on that world was simply the cessation of a sound that had been constant for 19 days. He had felt, he remembered, a kind of awe. The Accord did not have to break a world. It only had to ask it, in the right key, to stop wanting to fight, and the world stopped. By the 11th world, Toon had stopped feeling the awe and started feeling nothing at all, which the doctrine taught was the correct state for a voice of compliance. Feeling was a kind of wanting, and wanting was the thing the stillness took, and a voice who still wanted things was a voice the song might one day reach by accident. So Tufan had learned to want nothing. He filed the worlds. He wrote the dates. He read the calm on the upturned faces as gratitude, because that was the word the files used. And he had never in his life had cause to doubt that the word and the thing it described were the same. So when the high choir chose Earth, the small blue world in the thin spiral arm, Toon expected nothing new. A scan had been run. The humans were young. They had crossed only a sliver of their own little star cluster. They built ships of metal and pride and short tempers, and they fought one another constantly, which the Accord read as weakness. A species that could not agree with itself, the doctrine said, could never resist a song that offered it agreement. Toon filed that judgment without a second thought. He was wrong, and so was the doctrine, and so was every Severan who had ever lived. But none of them knew it yet. The scan of Earth had been thorough by the Accord's standards, which is to say, it had measured everything the Accord knew how to measure, and nothing it did not. It had counted the human ships, and found them few and slow. It had measured the human weapons and found them crude, projectiles and light lances, and clumsy folded space drives, nothing that could touch a fleet that conquered without ever closing to a fight. It had catalogued the human wars, the endless small conflicts the species waged against itself, and read them as proof of a fractured will. It had even sampled the human signals, the storm of speech and image the blue world flung into the dark, and found in them a chaos the Accord could not parse and so dismissed. What the scan had not measured, because the Accord had no instrument for it, was the one thing that made the humans the 42nd world, and not just another canyon world to be sung quiet. The scan had not measured what a human will did when something tried to take it. It had assumed, as the doctrine assumed, that a will was a will, that the soft place behind every mind was the same soft place, that a key which opened 41 locks would open the 42nd. The Accord had spent 900 years cutting one key. It had never once met a door that was not a lock at all. There was a thing about the Severan that the conquered species never had time to learn, because by the time they met the Accord, they were already inside the song. The Severan did not think of themselves as conquerors. They thought of themselves as the bringers of quiet. Their whole civilization was built on the belief that wanting was a sickness. that the hungers and the angers and the restless reaching of a young species were a kind of fever, and that the stillness was the cure. To sing a world quiet was, to the Severin, an act of healing. They genuinely believed it. That was what made them so terrible, and so hard to answer. An empire that knows it is cruel can be shamed. An empire that believes its cruelty is mercy has no soft place left to reach. The Accord had spent 900 years curing the galaxy of the fever of wanting, and it had never once asked the cured worlds whether they would rather have kept the fever and stayed alive inside it. Toon believed it too, in the beginning. He believed it the way he believed the floor would hold his weight, without ever once examining it. He was about to spend the rest of his life examining it, and finding it had never been there at all. The fleet that carried the order to Earth was called the Hymn of Settling. It was not a war fleet. The Accord did not need war fleets. It was a choir fleet, 240 vessels arranged in nested rings, each ship a resonator built to carry one strand of the stillness across the dark. At its center floated the cradle, a vessel 9 kilometers wide, hollow as a bell, where the high choir sat and sang. The Hymn of Settling had unmade the will of 41 worlds. It had never once been answered with a shot. Toon rode in the third ring, in a recording cell barely large enough to turn around in, surrounded by the soft machinery that would write down Earth's surrender for the eternal files. His task was simple. When the humans knelt, he would log the moment, the date, the first word of yielding, the name of whoever spoke it. He prepared his instruments with care. He had a clean page ready. He always did. The crossing took 90 days. Toon spent them the way he spent every crossing, in the recording cell, reviewing the files of the worlds the Hymn of Settling had already settled, so that the new entry for Earth would match the form of the old ones. It was tidy work. He liked tidy work. He read the file for the Canyon world, his first, the 19 days of rail throwers, and the slow silence after. He read the file for the third world, where the song had taken only 4 days, and the file for the seventh, where it had taken less than 1. The pattern was always the same. Resistance, then doubt, then the flattening, then the calm. 41 times the pattern had held. Toon had no reason to expect Earth to break it, and so he did not. He prepared the entry. He left only the name blank, because he did not yet know whose voice would speak the first word of yielding, and a voice of compliance never guessed a name. He waited for the world to give it. The Hymn of Settling crossed into the human system on the 90th day, and the singing began. It did not begin loud. The stillness never did. It began like a pressure behind the eyes, a sense that struggle was tiring, and surrender was rest. The choir aimed it at Earth and let it pour, strand over strand, 240 voices braided into one long note that had broken the spine of empires. Toon watched the readouts that measured the human response. On every other world, those readouts had told the same story. First, confusion, then fear, then a slow flattening as the will went soft and the fight drained out of a billion throats at once. The human readouts did the first thing, confusion. He saw it spike across the blue world, a flicker of millions of minds noticing the pressure. Then the readouts did something he had never seen on any instrument in his life. They did not flatten. They sharpened. The pressure behind the eyes met something in the human mind, and, instead of yielding, the human mind closed around it like a fist. Toon felt it through his own instruments, a feedback shiver that ran up the recording arms and made the soft machinery hum. The choir pushed harder. He heard the great note climb, and the blue world below did not kneel. It turned its face up the way the others had, yes, but it was not gratitude on those billions of faces. It was attention. The high choir, confused, did the only thing 900 years of unbroken success had taught it to do. It sang louder. It poured the full stillness onto Earth, every strand, every voice, the note that had never failed. And Earth answered. Not with a song. The humans had no song to match the choir, no weapon of the mind, no folded light. They answered the only way a young, stubborn, quarrelsome species could answer a command to surrender its own will. They sent a signal back up the beam. It was crude. It was a single line of their own speech, repeated, riding the Accord's own frequency back into the cradle like a stone thrown up a waterfall. The translators took a moment to render it. When they did, the words appeared on every screen in the Hymn of Settling at once, in the flat gray letters the Accord used for foreign tongues. "We heard you. Now hear us." Tutulun did not understand it yet. He logged it anyway, out of habit, on the clean page meant for Earth's surrender. He wrote down the date. He wrote down the first words. He left the name blank, because he did not yet know whose voice it was. He would learn the name later. By then, he would have learned a great many things. The Accord had spent 9 centuries making sure no Severin ever had to learn. Far below, on the blue world that would not be still, the humans were already moving, not toward their knees, toward their docks. The cradle held a council that night, if a thing without sleep can be said to have a night. Tuan was not invited. Voices of compliance were record keepers, not deciders. But the recording cells were wired to the council chamber so that history could be written as it happened, and so Tutun heard everything the High Choir said while it tried to understand a world that had refused to kneel. The first voice, oldest of the choir, spoke first. Her name in the files was Salis Vor, and she had sung the stillness onto more worlds than any living Severin. She said the failure was a tuning error. The human mind was simply built on a different frequency, she said, and the choir had only to find the right strand, and the surrender would come as it always came. She ordered the song rebuilt. She ordered it aimed again. The second voice disagreed, carefully, the way one disagrees with someone who has unmade 41 worlds. He said the readouts had not shown a frequency mismatch. They had shown the opposite. The human mind had received the stillness perfectly. It had understood the command to surrender completely, and then it had chosen, with full understanding, not to obey. That was not a tuning error, the second voice said. That was something the Accord had no word for, because the Accord had never met it. Salis Vor said there was a word for it. The word was defiance, and defiance was simply surrender that had not yet been sung loudly enough. Tuhin, in his cell, wrote both their words down. He believed Salis. Everyone believed Salis. She had been right for 900 years. The choir rebuilt the song. It took 3 days. Tuan recorded those 3 days too. The endless retuning, the strands tested one at a time against captured samples of human speech, the choir hunting for the frequency that would slip past whatever had closed around the first song. He listened to the choir try 1,000 keys against the human lock, and find that none of them turned. Salis Vor called it patience. The second voice, more quietly, called it the first time in 900 years the choir had ever had to look for a key it could not find. On the third day, in the recording cell, Tuan did a thing he was not supposed to do. He listened to the human samples himself, not to tune anything. He had no part in the tuning. He listened because he was a voice whose work was the truth of things, and the human speech had begun to bother him in a way he could not file. It was loud and overlapping, and full of argument. 3 humans in a single captured signal would say 3 different things, and none of them would yield, and the signal would end with all 3 still saying their different things. And somehow this did not break the humans the way the Accord's doctrine said disagreement broke a species. Somehow the argument was the thing holding them together. Tutun could not file that. There was no form for it. He set the samples aside and told himself it did not matter, and he was wrong about that, the way he was wrong about everything else, but he did not yet know it. When the song was ready, the cradle aimed every strand at Earth, and sang the stillness a second time, louder and deeper, and more total than it had ever been sung at any world in the history of the Accord. It was a note meant to flatten a planet. It was the sound of 9 centuries of certainty. Earth listened to all of it. And then the humans turned off the lights. Tutuan saw it on the optical feeds. The blue world had been speckled with the glow of its cities, 10,000 bright clusters scattered across the night side. As the second song reached its peak, those lights went dark, region by region, in a wave that swept around the planet in less than an hour. Not destroyed, switched off. A whole species reaching for the same switch at the same moment, as if it had decided, all at once, that it no longer needed to be seen. When the dark side of Earth was fully black, something rose out of it. The first instruments to catch it could not agree on what they were seeing, because the things rising from Earth gave the instruments almost nothing to catch. They put out no light. They reflected no light. They drank the starshine that fell on them, and gave none of it back, so that each one read on the optical feed as a whole. a piece of space where the stars had been deleted. The thermal sensors found only the faintest smear of heat, far less than a hull that size should bleed. The mass sensors went pale. Whatever these ships were made of, it sat in the readings like a stone at the bottom of deep water, present and heavy, and impossible to see clearly. There were 900 of them. Toon counted them one at a time, the way his training demanded, marking each hole in the stars as it climbed clear of the dark side and held its place in the rising wall. He counted to 100 and felt the first thread of something the doctrine had taught him to want nothing of, and he counted to 300, and the thread became a rope, and he counted to 600 and stopped pretending he could file what he was seeing as anything the Accord had a word for. 900 warships, each one longer than the cradle, each one a piece of deleted space rising in total silence, out of a world the Accord had ordered to kneel 3 days before. The Accord had a catalog of every fleet it had ever met. 41 fleets, one for each settled world, every one of them measured and filed and found wanting. Tutu knew that catalog. He had read it on the crossing. Not one fleet in it had ever exceeded 90 hulls. Not one had ever been built of a material the Accord's sensors could not read. Not one had risen in silence, because every other species in the galaxy built ships that shouted, that burned, that bled heat and light and pride into the dark, because they wanted to be seen as strong. The humans had built 900 ships that wanted to be seen as nothing at all, and somehow, that was the most frightening thing Tushun had ever recorded. Tuhun counted twice, because the first count could not be real. 900 warships, each one longer than the cradle, rising out of Earth's night in perfect silence, and arranging themselves into a formation the Accord's tacticians had no template for. They did not form rings, the Accord formed rings. These formed a wall, a flat black sheet of hulls that turned its edge toward the hymn of settling, and then simply held there, between the humans' world and the choir fleet, between the song and the throats it had come to silence. The humans had a name for the formation. The translators pulled it from the open channels. The human ships were no longer bothering to encrypt, because the humans wanted the Accord to hear it. They called it the Black Armada. They called the ships the Umbral Tier. And the lead vessel, the largest hole in the stars, the one that pushed to the center of the wall and sat there like a closed door, they called the Long Refusal. The names told Tu something, the way names always did. The Accord named its fleets for the work they did to others. The hymn of settling settled. The choir ships were named for the strands they carried. Even the cradle was named for the gentle thing the Accord pretended its conquest was. A cradle, a rocking, a quieting. The human names were different. The Long Refusal was not named for anything it did to an enemy. It was named for a thing the humans did with themselves. They refused. The whole Armada was named for an absence, a color that was the absence of light, a refusal that was the absence of yielding. The Accord named its weapons for the surrender they produced. The humans named theirs for the surrender they would not give. Tutun wrote the names down and felt, looking at them on the page, the first cold edge of understanding, that he was recording the actions of a species the Accord had no instrument to measure, because the Accord measured only what could be taken, and the humans had built an entire fleet around the one thing that could not be. Toon wrote the names down. His writing arm was not steady. In the council chamber, Salis Vor studied the black wall and was not afraid. She had seen fleets before. 41 worlds had built fleets, had launched them, had pointed their guns at the hymn of settling in those first confused days, before the song reached deep enough. Every one of those fleets had lowered its guns and turned for home, crews weeping with a relief they could not explain, because the stillness did not need to defeat a fleet, it only needed to reach the minds inside it. So Salis Vor did not order a single shot. She ordered the choir to sing the black ships down. The cradle turned its full voice on the Long Refusal and the 900 hulls of the Umbral Tier, and it sang the stillness directly into them at a range close enough to flatten the will of a god. Tu hear and watched the readouts that measured the human response, and for a long moment nothing happened at all. The song poured into the black wall, and the black wall drank it the way the hulls drank the starlight. No fear spike, no confusion, no flattening. The stillness went into those ships and did not come back out, and the instruments that should have measured a billion minds going soft measured only that flat, heavy stone at the bottom of deep water silence. The second voice asked, quietly why the crews were not responding to the song. It was a human who answered. The lead channel from the long refusal opened, and a voice came across it, calm and unbothered, and addressed directly to the cradle. The translators rendered it as it spoke. The voice said, "You are singing to our hulls. Our hulls do not have minds for you to reach. Save your breath. You will want it." The second voice, in the council chamber, did a thing no member of the high choir had done in living memory. He answered the human directly, not with the song but with words, because words were all that was left when the song would not land. He asked the human what it wanted. He asked it to name its terms. The human did not name terms. It said, "We do not want anything from you. That is the part you cannot understand, so I will say it plainly, and your record keeper can write it down. We did not come to take your worlds or your ships or your song. We came because you ordered ours to kneel, and because before you ordered ours, you ordered 41 others, and 41 others knelt and were switched off and forgotten, and someone has to be the thing you cannot do that to. We are that thing. There are no terms. There is only the lesson. You will learn what standing looks like, and then you will go home, and you will know, for the rest of your 900 more years, that there is a world in the dark you ordered to kneel, that did not, and could not, and would not. That is what we want. We want you to know we exist. You will never be able to forget it again." Etuthan wrote it all down. It was the strangest demand he had ever recorded, because it was not a demand at all. The human did not want tribute or territory or surrender. It wanted to be remembered. It wanted the accord, the great forgetting machine that switched off worlds and filed them as settled, to be made permanently, painfully, unable to forget one single thing. And Tutun, whose entire profession was the soft and selective memory of an empire that survived by remembering only the surrenders, understood with a cold clarity that this was the most dangerous demand any species had ever made of the Severan Accord. Tu Nibble did not know then what the human ships were made of. He learned it later, in the wreck of his own certainty, and it was simpler and stranger than anything the Accord guessed. The umbral tier hulls were not armored against the stillness. They were built so that the song had nothing to grip. The black coating that ate the starlight, ate the folded light of the choir too, swallowed it, scattered it into heat too faint to read, so that the strands of the stillness arrived at the crew, already broken into noise. The humans had not learned to resist the song. They had built a wall the song could not climb, and then they had put themselves behind it. The Accord had spent 900 years perfecting a key that opened every mind in the galaxy. The humans had simply built a door with no lock. It was, Tuan would think much later, the most human thing about them. The galaxy was full of species that had tried to resist the stillness with strength of will, with discipline, with drugs and machines and prayers, with great fortresses of the mind raised against the song. Every one of those defenses was a kind of agreement. To resist the song with willpower was to agree that the song reached the will, and to fight it there, on its own ground, where it always won. The humans had refused the agreement entirely. They had not asked how to make a mind that could not be sung to. They had asked how to make a hull the song could not reach, and then they had hidden their minds behind it, and the question had been so much simpler and so much stranger than anything the Accord expected, that 900 years of doctrine had no answer for it at all. The stillness was a master of minds. It had never once had to fight a wall. Sci-Fi Vor ordered the song louder. It was the only answer she had. For 9 centuries, it had been the only answer anyone had needed. The choir sang until the cradle's resonators glowed. It poured the stillness onto the black Armada in a flood that should have hollowed out 1,000 worlds, and the black wall held, and drank, and did not move, and after a while, the lead voice from the long refusal came back across the channel, and this time, it was not calm. It was amused. The voice said, "Our records show you have done this to 41 worlds. We read the files you left behind in the dark. We listened to what those worlds became after you sang them quiet. We are not here to kneel, Accord. We are here for the 41. Tutun stopped writing. He had recorded 11 of those 41 himself. He had stood in the sky towers and logged the surrenders, and read the calm on those upturned faces as gratitude. He had filed the worlds as settled, as joined, as part of the quiet. He had never once asked what was inside the calm. It was not his task to ask. It was his task to write it down. Now a human voice was telling the cradle that it had read his files, that it had gone to those worlds, the settled ones, the joined ones, and listened to what the stillness had actually made of them. And the human voice was not describing gratitude. The second voice asked the human, across the channel, what it had found on the settled worlds. The human told it. The translators rendered every word, flat and gray, and Tufan made himself read all of it, because he was a voice of compliance, and the work was to write down what was true, even when it cost. The humans had found populations that no longer spoke, because speech requires wanting to be understood, and the stillness had taken the wanting. They had found cities that ran on schedule and grew nothing new, because invention requires the itch of dissatisfaction, and the stillness had smoothed the itch away. They had found a species that built ships of beautiful geometry, and another that wrote no songs of its own anymore, and a third that had simply, over 4 generations, stopped having children, because the future is a thing you reach for, and the stillness had taken the reaching. The Accord had not killed the 41 worlds. It had done something the humans had a colder word for. It had switched them off and left them running. The human voice said, "You call it peace. We read your files. We have another word." It did not say the word. It did not need to. The Black Armada was the word. In the council chamber, the second voice was silent. The first voice, HFY War, was not. She said that the human ships were a wall and nothing more. A wall could not sing. A wall could not unmake a will. The Accord had been answered with engineering, she said, and engineering was a small and brittle thing compared to the song. She ordered the hymn of settling to advance. 240 resonator ships moved toward the black wall, singing as they came, certain that no hull could drink the stillness forever. Tutuan watched them go. He wanted to believe Salis. He had spent his whole life believing Salis. But he had read the line the humans threw back up the beam on the first day. "We heard you, now hear us." And he was beginning to understand, in the recording cell wired to the council of a fleet that had never been answered, that he had spent his life writing down only half of every conversation. He had logged the song. He had never once logged what the song did after it landed. The humans had logged it, all of it, for 41 worlds. Tu thought about the 11th world, the one whose last note records the Accord had sealed so deep. He had not been there for the singing of the last note. He had come after, to file the settlement, and he had walked the quiet streets of a city that ran perfectly and grew nothing, and he had logged it as settled and never asked why the city felt like a held breath that would never be released. The humans had walked those same streets, he realized, 900 light-years from home, in ships the color of nothing. They had gone to the world Tunan filed as settled, and they had stood where he stood, and they had asked the question he had been trained never to ask. What is inside the calm? And they had not liked the answer, and they had built 900 warships, and they had come. That, more than the 900 black hulls, more than the wall the choir could not climb, was the thing that began to frighten him. The Accord had a voice of compliance to write its history. The humans, it seemed, had read that history more carefully than the Accord had ever bothered to. The hymn of settling closed the distance, singing. The Black Armada waited, drinking, silent. And then, 50 kilometers out, the long refusal opened a different channel, not to the cradle this time, to every ship in the hymn of settling at once, on every frequency, so that no resonator ship could pretend not to have heard. The translators rendered it. Tutan copied it word for word onto the page that had been meant for Earth's surrender. The humans said, "You ordered our world to kneel. We have decided to teach you what standing looks like. You may go back to your cradle and tell the choir what you saw. Some of you will be allowed to. We have not decided how many." Then the wall of holes in the stars began, for the first time, to move forward. And Tulidro, third-rank voice of compliance, who had filed 11 worlds as settled, and never asked what settled meant, felt the recording cell go cold around him, and understood that he was about to write a history the Accord had spent 900 years making certain it would never have to read. The hymn of settling had never learned how to fight, because for 900 years it had never needed to. That was the first thing the Black Armada took from it. The Accord's resonator ships were built to sing, not to shoot. They carried no heavy guns, only a few light defensive lances meant for clearing debris. Their hulls were thin, their crews small, their training entirely in the art of holding a note steady across the dark. When Salis Vor ordered them forward into the black wall, she was ordering a choir to charge a fortress, and she did it without a flicker of doubt, because in her experience, the fortress always knelt before the choir arrived. Tutuin watched the two formations close through the optical feed, the bright Severin rings against the deleted star black of the umbral tier. He found himself looking for a human he could name. He had left the name blank on his page, and the blankness bothered him, the way an unfinished thing bothers a creature whose whole life is finishing things. The channels gave him names eventually. The humans were not hiding them. On the long refusal, there was a fleet marshal named Dane Holloway, an old man by human reckoning, whose voice carried the flat patience of someone who had already decided how a thing would end, and was simply waiting for the universe to catch up. And there was a smaller voice that handled the translation channel, a human who turned the Accord's gray words into human speech, and human speech back into the gray words, so that nothing was lost between the two fleets. The translators caught her rank and name from the open channel. She was a petty officer, which Tuon understood to be a low rank, a record keeper of sorts, a voice of the human fleet. Her name was Neela Brandt. Tuon fixed on her without quite knowing why, perhaps because she did his job, perhaps because, in a fleet of 900 warships built to drink songs and delete stars, she was the one human whose task was simply to make sure the two sides understood each other. He listened to her voice on the translation channel, calm and exact, and he thought, she is writing this down too. On her side. We are the only two in either fleet who will remember it the same way. There was a thing he noticed about Neela Brandt's work that he could not stop noticing, because it was the opposite of his own. When the cradle sang an order at the Black Armada, Tuon's instruments recorded the order. When the humans answered, Neela Brandt's voice rendered the answer into the Accord's gray words and sent it back, complete. Nothing softened, nothing left out. She translated even the parts that were insults. She translated even the parts that named the Accord's crimes. A voice of compliance would have filed those parts under a kinder heading, or filed them not at all, because the work of compliance was to make the surrender look like peace. Neela Brandt did the reverse. Her work was to make absolutely certain the Accord could not pretend it had not understood. She would not let a single word be lost between the fleets, because a word lost was a way out, and the humans had not come to give the Accord a way out. They had come to be understood completely, and then to act. Tuon had spent his life making things easier to bear by making them less clear. He listened to a human do the opposite, on purpose, with great care, and he understood that he was hearing a kind of honesty his people had no name for, because his people had spent 900 years making certain they would never need one. Then the fleets met, and there was a great deal to remember. The stillness reached the umbral tier, and died against it, every strand, swallowed into the black and gone. The choir sang anyway, because the choir knew nothing else. 240 voices pouring into a wall that ate them. And the Black Armada, having let the song wash over it one last time, answered. It did not answer with sound. Tuon had braced for some human song, some counter note, because he could only imagine a war fought the way his people fought, voice against voice. There was no voice. The umbral tier hulls opened along their dark flanks, and from those openings came the human way of saying no. The first salvo was light, hard light, focused and folded into lances so tight, they read on the instruments as solid lines drawn between ship and ship. Where a line touched a resonator of the hymn of settling, the resonator stopped singing. Not destroyed in fire, cut. The thin Accord hulls opened where the lances crossed them, and the song machinery inside went dark, and the voice that ship had carried fell out of the great note and was gone. 11 resonator ships fell silent in the first 4 seconds. Tuon heard it happen. The choir's note had a shape he had known his whole life, a vast nested harmony of 240 strands, and now strands were dropping out of it one after another, and the harmony was developing holes, and the holes were the sound of his people learning, 4 seconds at a time, that they could be answered. In the council chamber, Salis Vor ordered the rings to tighten. It was the only maneuver the Accord knew, the closing of the choir around a target. The resonator ships drew in toward the cradle, still singing, and the Black Armada let them come, because a tighter ring is only a closer target. Between the first salvo and the second, there was a moment that Tuhun would carry for the rest of his life, and it had nothing to do with weapons. The long refusal opened the lead channel and offered the hymn of settling a chance to stop. Fleet Marshal Holloway, in his flat, patient voice, with Neela Brandt rendering it, "You have lost 11 ships. We have lost none. We will say this once. Cut the song, turn your fleet, and go. We will open a lane. No more of you have to fall silent today. The choice is yours, and it is a real choice, which is more than you gave the 41. It was a real choice. That was the thing Tuan could not file. The Accord had never offered a world a real choice in 900 years, because the whole point of the song was to take the choosing away. Surrender was not chosen on a settled world. It was sung into being, gently, until the world could not remember a time it had wanted anything else. And here was a human warship, holding the upper hand absolutely, having lost nothing, offering the Accord the one thing the Accord had never offered anyone: the chance to stop, the chance to choose. HFY War did not take it. She heard the offer, and Toon heard her dismiss it as a trick, because a creature that had never given a real choice could not believe one was being given. She ordered the song louder. The chance closed, and the second salvo came, and it was not light. It was mass. The umbral tier flung slugs of their dense dark metal across the gap at speeds that turned them into lines of force, and where those lines met the gathered rings they did not cut. They broke. Whole resonator ships came apart, their thin hulls folding, their song machinery scattering into the dark in pieces that still glowed faintly with the last of the stillness they had been carrying. The note of the choir lurched. 40 strands gone now. 50. The harmony that had unmade 41 worlds was coming apart in front of Tutun's instruments, like a rope unraveling under a weight it had never been built to hold. And still the Accord had not landed a single blow on the Black Armada. The light lances of the resonator ships, the few they had, fired into the black wall and were drunk like everything else, scattered into faint heat by hulls that gave nothing back. The umbral tier did not so much as adjust its formation. It advanced, drinking and cutting and breaking, and the bright rings of the hymn of settling thinned around the cradle like frost in the sun. Tufan studied the way the humans fought, because his instruments showed it to him, and because he could not look away. It was nothing like the wars in the human files, the chaotic self-conflicts the Accord had read as weakness. There was no chaos here. Each ship of the umbral tier moved as if it were part of one mind, and yet not the flattened single mind of a hive, not the smoothed sameness the stillness made of a world. The humans argued, even now. Tuan could hear them on the open channels, captains disagreeing about targets, a gunnery voice questioning an order, and the order being changed because the question was good. They fought like the 3 humans in the captured signal, who had said 3 different things and not yielded. They disagreed all the way through the battle, and the disagreement made them faster, sharper, harder to predict, because no single plan could be sung quiet when 900 ships were each arguing the plan into something better in real time. The doctrine had said, a species that could not agree with itself could never resist the song. The doctrine had it exactly backward. The humans could not be sung quiet, precisely because they had never been quiet to begin with. There was no single will for the stillness to flatten. There were 900 wills, arguing. And the argument was the armor under the armor, the thing behind the black hulls that the song would never have reached, even if the hulls had let it through. Tuan wrote that down too. He was not sure the Accord would ever read it. He wrote it anyway. It was true, and he had decided to write the true things. Toon made himself write it all down. 11 ships in 4 seconds, 40 by the first minute. He logged the names of the ships as they fell silent, the resonators he had trained beside, the voices he had known. His writing arm shook, and he steadied it with the other, and he kept writing, because if he was the only Severin who would remember this the way it actually happened, then he had a duty to the actual happening. On the translation channel, Neela Brandt's voice came across to the cradle, even and clear, relaying the words of Fleet Marshal Holloway. She said, "The Marshal wants you to understand that this is not the war. This is the answer to the order. The war would have been if you had reached our world. You did not reach our world. You will not. The Marshal asks the choir to consider stopping the song. It is the only thing you are doing that is making this worse." In the council chamber, the second voice begged HFY War to stop the song. He said the humans were telling them plainly, The stillness was not reaching the black hulls. It was only marking the Accord ships as targets, only telling the Black Armada which holes in the formation still needed cutting. Every voice still singing was a flag raised over a ship that wanted to be hit. Sci-Fi War would not stop the song. Tuon heard her refuse, heard the old certainty in her, the 900 years of being right. She said that no wall could drink forever. She said the human hulls would saturate, would fill, would overflow, and when they did, the stillness would pour through, and the crews behind the wall would kneel like everyone else. She had unmade 41 worlds. She could not make herself believe in the 42nd. So the choir sang, and the Black Armada cut, and the rings thinned. Tuon lifted his eyes from the page long enough to look at the long refusal on the optical feed, the great closed door at the center of the black wall. He thought about the line the humans had thrown up the beam on the first day. "We heard you, now hear us." And he understood, finally, what it had meant. The Accord had never once in 900 years been heard. It had only ever sung. It had poured its will into world after world, and never stood still long enough to receive a single word back, because receiving was not its nature. Receiving was surrender. The Accord did not surrender. The Accord sang. The humans had heard the song completely, and then they had built a fleet whose entire purpose was to make the Accord do the one thing it had never done. Listen. The long refusal opened the lead channel to the cradle again, and this time Fleet Marshal Holloway spoke himself, in his own flat human voice, and let Neela Brant render it strand by strand into the gray words so that nothing was lost. He said, "You have lost 60 ships. We have lost none. I am telling you that number not to frighten you, but so that your record keeper, whoever he is, writes it down correctly. We know you have one. Every empire that conquers by paperwork keeps a clerk. Tell your clerk the count is honest. 60-0. Tell him we will keep it honest all the way down, however far down you make us go." Tuon went still in his cell. The human had spoken to him, not by name, because the human did not know his name, but the human knew he existed. The human knew that somewhere in the dying choir fleet there was a creature whose task was to write the truth of this, and the human had reached past the choir and the council and the song, all the way down to the recording cell, to tell that creature that the count was honest, and to keep it honest. 60-0. Tuon looked at the number, and felt the weight of it, the way only a record keeper can. Numbers were his whole trade. He had written thousands of them, populations and dates and ship counts, and he had learned that a number could lie as easily as a word, that the Accord's files were full of honest-looking numbers, arranged to tell a soft and pleasant story. The count of a settled world's population, for instance, never changed in the files, never dropped, because the stillness did not kill. The numbers stayed neat. They simply stopped meaning anything, because the things they counted had stopped being alive in any way the number could measure. 60-0 was not that kind of number. 60-0 was the rarest thing in all of Tuon's experience. It was a number that meant exactly what it said. 60 Severan ships silent. 0 human ships lost. No softening, no arrangement, no kind heading to file it under. Just the truth, naked, handed to him across the dark by a fleet that had built its entire war around the truth being unhideable. And the human at the head of that fleet had reached past the whole choir fleet to find him, the one creature in the Accord whose job was numbers, and had asked him to keep this one honest. 60-0. Tuon wrote it down. 60-0. He wrote it because it was true, and because a human warship at the head of a Black Armada had asked him to, and because in 900 years no one, not Sci-Fi War, not the High Choir, not the Accord itself, had ever once asked Tuon Ledro to tell the truth. They had only ever asked him to file the surrender. The surrender was not coming. He understood that now, with a clarity that felt almost like the stillness in reverse, a song of waking instead of sleeping. Earth was not going to kneel. The 41 settled worlds had been heard, finally, by someone, and the someone had built 900 black ships and come to say their names back to the empire that had switched them off. Sci-Fi War ordered the song louder. The choir, what was left of it, obeyed, and the Black Armada, drinking and cutting and breaking, moved forward through the thinning rings toward the 9-kilometer bell at their center, where the High Choir sat and sang the only word the Accord had ever known how to say. Tuon looked down at his page. Below the honest count, On the line he had left blank since the first day, the line meant for the name of whoever first spoke Earth's surrender, he wrote a different name instead. He wrote, Neela Brandt, voice of the human fleet, the one who made sure we understood. It was not a surrender. It was the opposite of a surrender, but it was the truest thing on the page, and Toon had decided, somewhere in the last 60 silenced ships, that from now on, he would only write the true things. The Accord had one weapon left that it had never used, because in 900 years, it had never met an enemy worth the cost. Tuhun learned of it from the Council channel, in the hour when the hymn of settling had lost 90 of its 240 voices, and the rings around the cradle had gone from a sphere to a thinning shell. HFY War called it the last note. It was the stillness sung not at a target but at everything, a single strand so total that it did not reach into minds and loosen them. It seized them. It did not ask a will to lie down. It took the will away. The Accord had built it as a final mercy, a thing to be sung over a world that fought too hard, so that the fighting would simply cease, all of it, in every skull at once, forever. It had a price. To sing the last note, the choir had to open itself completely, drop every shield it kept around its own minds, and become a pure channel for the song. While the last note sounded, the choir was defenseless. Worse, the choir was, for the length of the note, no longer protected from its own weapon. The stillness, sung that total, did not know the difference between an enemy and the throat that carried it. The second voice said it was madness. He said the human hulls drank the song. The last note would pour into the Black Armada and be swallowed like every note before it, and meanwhile the choir would sit open and exposed in the middle of its own strongest weapon. He begged HFY War to let the survivors scatter, to carry the truth of Earth home, to warn the Accord that there was a world that could not be settled and ships that could not be sung. HFY War would not scatter. She had unmade 41 worlds. She would not be the first voice who carried home a defeat. She ordered the last note prepared. Tutuan sat in his cell and waited. He was a voice of compliance. His loyalty, his whole self, belonged to the Accord, to the song, to the work of writing down surrenders. The last note was about to be sung. If it landed, the war would be over, the black ships hollowed out, the crews behind the wall flattened at last, and Toon would file the human surrender on the clean page he had prepared 90 days ago, and the doctrine would be proved right, and 900 years of certainty would roll on unbroken. Everything he was told him to stay silent and let it happen. But Toon had read the human files in his own way, over the last hours. He had watched the umbral tier drink every song the choir threw at it, including the rebuilt one, including the loudest the Accord had ever sung. He had watched 900 ships lose nothing, while the hymn of settling lost ship after ship after ship. He had heard a human voice reach down past the council to find the one creature whose job was the truth, and ask him to keep the count honest. And he had begun, somewhere in the silenced ships, to do a thing the stillness took from every world it touched. He had begun to want. He wanted the count to stay honest. That was the want. It was a small one, by the standards of the species the Accord had settled, who had wanted freedom and futures, and the right to keep their own hungers. Tutun only wanted the number to be true. But it was a want, his own, the first he could remember having, and it pulled against everything the doctrine had bred into him. And it won, because the last note could not be filed honestly. If he stayed silent and let the humans walk into a thing he had seen coming, then the count was a lie, and the record was a lie, and Tuan Ledro was what he had always been, a voice who softened the truth until it could be born. And he had decided, on the line where he wrote Neela Brandt's name, that he would not be that anymore. So Tuan, in his cell, did something a voice of compliance had never done. He opened a channel of his own. He did not have the authority. He did not have the rank, but the recording cells were wired to every frequency so that history could be written from any angle. And Tuan used that wiring now to reach, not the cradle, not the council, but the translation channel of the long refusal. The one Neela Brandt kept open. He spoke into it, in his own voice, in the gray foreign words he had spent his life filing. He said, "This is the record keeper of the Accord, the one your marshal spoke to. The choir is going to sing a thing called the last note. It will open them. While it sounds, they have no shield, not even from themselves. I am telling you because your marshal asked me to keep the Count honest. The Count cannot be honest if I let you walk into a thing I saw coming." There was a pause on the channel. Then Neela Brandt's voice came back, and for the first time it was not relaying Fleet Marshal Holloway. It was only her. She said, "What is your name?" Tutu told her. Tutu Tunledro. 3rd rank. Voice of compliance. She said, "Thank you, Tutun Ledro. The marshal heard you. He says to tell you that we already knew about the last note. We read it in your files, on the 11th of the 41 worlds, where your people sang it once, and then sealed the records so deep we almost missed them. We have known what it does for a long time, but you told us anyway, when you did not have to, and that is the difference between us and the thing you serve. We will remember that you told us." Tutun closed the channel. His arms were shaking again. He had just betrayed the Accord, the only thing he had ever been, to a fleet of black ships that wanted it dead, and he felt, for the first time in his life, that he had written something true on the page that was his soul. He sat with what he had done, a voice of compliance who warned the enemy. By every rule he had ever filed under, it was the worst thing a Severin could do, a betrayal of the song, of the choir, of 900 years of settling. And yet it did not feel like betrayal. It felt like the first honest entry in a file full of soft headings. He had spent his whole life writing down half of every conversation, the half where the world surrendered, and leaving out the half where the world died inside its own calm. Now, for once, he had recorded the whole thing. He had told the truth to the only fleet in the dark that wanted the whole truth recorded. If that was betrayal, then he had been betraying the truth his entire life, and the warning he had just sent was the first time he had ever been loyal to anything at all. He thought of the 11th world's sealed records, the ones the humans had said they almost missed. He thought of the last note sung once and then buried so deep that even the Accord pretended it had never happened. He understood now why it had been buried. Not because the Accord was ashamed of using it on an enemy. The Accord was ashamed of nothing it did to enemies. It had buried the last note because, that one time it was sung, something had gone wrong, something the files would not say, and Toon could guess now what it was. The last note did not know the difference between an enemy and the throat that carried it. The Accord had nearly sung itself quiet once, long ago, and had sealed the memory so deep that even the first voice had let herself forget the price. The humans had not forgotten. The humans never forgot anything. That was the whole shape of the war. Before the choir sang, there was a silence in the cradle, the strange held silence of a fleet about to do the one thing it had sworn never to do again. Toon felt it through every instrument. The Black Armada felt it too. The umbral tier had been advancing for an hour, drinking and cutting, and now it stopped. 900 holes in the stars held their place and waited, and the lead channel opened one final time before the last note, and Fleet Marshal Holloway said a thing that Toon did not understand until much later. He said, "We know what you are about to do. We have read it. You do not have to. There is still a lane open. There is still a choice. We are not eager for what happens when you open yourselves to your own song. We have seen the records. We do not want to watch it. Cut the last note before you sing it, and turn, and go, and we will let you carry home only the count, which is bad enough. Sing it, and you will carry home something far worse, and it will not be our doing. It will be yours. We are giving you, one last time, the choice you never gave the 41. Salis Vor ordered the last note sung. She could not do otherwise. That was the tragedy of her, Tuan thought, watching it happen. She was not evil in the way the lesser species imagined evil. She was certain. She had been right for 900 years, and a creature that has been right for 900 years cannot make itself believe in the existence of the cliff it is walking toward, even when a human voice describes the cliff in detail and offers a lane away from it. Certainty was the Accord's true weapon, and its true wound. It had let the Severin conquer 41 worlds without doubt, and it would now let them sing themselves quiet without doubt, because doubt was the one thing 900 years of being right had bred entirely out of them. The choir sang the last note. It was not a sound Tuan could describe in the files, though he tried, later, for years. It was the stillness made absolute. Every strand the choir had ever known, braided into one strand, and sung with the whole open, undefended heart of the high choir, aimed at the Black Armada at a range of 9 kilometers. It was a note meant to end 900 warships, and every mind inside them in a single held breath. The umbral tier drank it. Of course it drank it. The black hulls drank everything. The last note poured into the wall of deleted stars and was swallowed, scattered, gone, exactly as the second voice had warned, exactly as the human files had recorded. The Black Armada did not so much as shift in its formation. The crews behind the wall felt nothing, because the wall ate the song before it ever reached them. But the choir was open now. The choir had dropped every shield, and the last note, the total stillness, the song that did not know the difference between an enemy and the throat that carried it, was sounding inside an undefended fleet at point-blank range to itself. Tutun watched the readouts that measured the Severan response, the same readouts that had measured Earth, and he saw the thing the Accord had spent 900 years making certain it would never have to see. The hymn of settling began to kneel. It started in the outer ring, in the resonator ships nearest the open cradle. The last note, finding no purchase on the black wall, washed back across its own fleet, and the strands reached into Severan minds that had no shield up, and the wills behind those minds went soft. The singing faltered, not from death this time, from peace. The crews of the Accord, the choir that had flattened 41 worlds, were being flattened by their own song, set down their stations one by one, with the same calm Tuan had logged as gratitude, on 11 other worlds. The same calm he now understood, far too late, was not gratitude at all, but the absence of everything that gratitude is made of. In the council chamber, HFY War realized what was happening, and ordered the last note stopped. But the last note could not be stopped quickly. It had to be opened to be sung, and closing it took time. The open choir no longer had, because the song was already in them, already loosening the hands that would have to do the closing. Tuan heard the first voice give the order to stop, and heard her own voice go calm and far away in the middle of giving it, the certainty draining out of her along with the will, until the order trailed off into a silence that was the most terrible sound he had ever heard. The Accord was singing itself to sleep. And the Black Armada watched it happen, and did not fire. Tutun watched the kneeling spread inward from the outer ring, and he watched the readouts the way he had watched them over Earth, and he saw the thing he had filed 11 times as gratitude, written now across the faces of his own people. The calm, the flattening, the soft setting down of every want. He had read it as peace on 11 worlds, because the files used that word. He could not read it as peace now. It was his own crews. He knew their names. He knew the resonator pilot in the outer ring, who had argued with him once, years ago, about the proper form for a settlement entry, who had wanted the truth in it, and been overruled by doctrine. Tunam watched that pilot's will go soft on the readout, and understood, far too late and forever, that the truth the pilot had wanted in the files was the truth Tunam was only now learning to write. The calm was not gratitude. It had never been gratitude. It was a creature with the wanting taken out, and there was nothing left in it to be grateful with. Tutun did not understand, at first, why the human ships had gone still. They had cut and broken and drunk for an hour. Now, with the choir open and helpless and unmaking itself, the umbral tier held its salvos. The lances did not fire. The mass slugs did not fly. 900 black warships simply waited, edge on, while the empire that had ordered Earth to kneel knelt to its own song. The lead channel opened. Fleet Marshal Holloway, in his flat, patient voice, with Neela Brandt rendering every strand so nothing was lost. He said, "We are not going to finish them with the song doing it for us. That would be your way, Accord, letting the stillness do the dying so no one has to look at it. We have decided to look at it. Stop your note and we will stop. We did not come to switch you off. We came to make you stand still long enough to hear the names of the worlds you switched off. You will hear them now, whether you kneel or not." And then the long refusal began to read the names. 41 worlds. The humans had them all, pulled from the Accord's own sealed files, the files Tuan and 1,000 voices of compliance like him had written, and stamped, and buried. The Black Armada read them across every frequency at once, the names the conquered worlds had called themselves before the stillness took the calling, one after another, slow and clear and exact, into the open, helpless heart of the choir fleet that had settled them. Tuan listened to all 41. He had logged 11 of them himself. He heard the names he had written as settled, as joined, as part of the quiet, read back to him now, as what they were, which was the names of the dead. The humans read them slowly. They did not rush. Each name was given its full weight, in the world's own tongue where the human files had recovered it, and then in the Accord's gray words so the choir could not pretend not to understand. The canyon world was on the list. Tuan heard its name, the name its tall pale people had called it before the 19 days of rail throwers, and the long silence after, and he had not known until that moment that the world had ever called itself anything. He had filed it by its Accord catalog number. The humans had found its true name in a children's song, recorded in the last year before the stillness took the singing, and they read the true name now into the dark, and Tunan wrote it on his page beside the catalog number he had used for 40 years, and the two names together were the whole history of what his people did, the living name and the dead number, side by side at last. He understood that the Black Armada's weapon was not the light lances or the mass slugs, or the hulls that drank every song. Its weapon was the record. The humans had read the history the Accord had written and refused to bury. They had carried it 900 light years and brought it back to the throat that sang it. They had made an armada whose final blow was the truth, read aloud, to an enemy that had spent 9 centuries making certain no one would ever read it back. In the council chamber, Salis Vor, half emptied by her own last note, with the certainty of 900 years draining out of her, found the will for one more order. She could not stop the note in time, so she did the only thing left to a first voice, who would not carry home a defeat. She ordered the cradle to ram the long refusal, 9 kilometers of bell against the great black door, a last note of a different kind, the Accord's whole certainty hurled at the human ship that had made it listen. The cradle began to move, and Tuan Ledro, in his recording cell, watching the empire he had served his whole life throw its open heart at the wall it could not climb, opened the translation channel one last time and warned them. The warning was 3 words. Tuan sent them on the translation channel as the cradle's 9 kilometers began to swing toward the long refusal. He said, "The cradle rams." Neela Brandt's voice came back at once, fast and clipped, no longer rendering the marshal, just moving. She said, "Scene. Hold, Tuan Ledro. Wherever you are in that thing, hold." Then the Black Armada moved, and Tuan learned what the umbral tier had been holding back. The black hulls had drunk songs and starlight for an hour, and never given any of it back. Now they gave it back. The long refusal did not dodge the cradle, and it did not fire on it. It opened. The great closed door that had sat at the center of the wall split along its length, and out of the dark inside it came a pulse of everything the hull had swallowed. An hour of folded Accord light and drunk starshine, and absorbed momentum, released in a single beat, aimed straight down the cradle's throat. The 9-kilometer bell met the pulse at 4 kilometers out. It did not shatter, it stopped. All of its certainty, all of its mass, all of 900 years of a fleet that had never been answered, hit a wall of its own returned song and simply ceased to move forward, hung there in the dark, with its motion taken from it, the way it had taken motion from 41 worlds. The humans had given the Accord back its own weapon, exactly, in kind. They had made it still. Then, and only then, the long refusal fired to kill. 1 lance. Tuan saw it on the optical feed, a single line of hard folded light drawn from the open black door to the cradle's heart, threaded with a precision that 900 years of Accord engineering could not have matched, in through the resonator throat and into the chamber of the high choir itself. It did not destroy the cradle, it cut the choir. The voices in the great bell, already half emptied by their own last note, fell silent all at once, the way the resonators had fallen silent in the first 4 seconds, and the song that had unmade 41 worlds ended in the middle of a breath it would never finish. The stillness stopped. It was the most precise act of violence Tushan had ever recorded, and it was, in its way, the gentlest. The humans had every reason to gut the cradle, to break the 9-kilometer bell into the same scattered pieces they had made of 90 resonator ships. They did not. The lance went exactly where it needed to go and nowhere else. It cut the choir and left the cradle's hull whole, left the crews in the lower decks alive, left even most of the high choir breathing, only silenced, only stripped of the one chamber that turned their voices into a weapon. The humans had not come to destroy the cradle. They had come to remove its ability to sing, and they did exactly that, with one shot, threaded through 9 kilometers of resonator throat into a chamber the size of a single room, at a range where the Accord's own gunners could not have hit the bell itself. It was the difference, Tuan thought, between an empire that burned what it could not understand and an armada that understood precisely and used the understanding to take only what needed taking. Tuan felt it stop the way a creature feels a pressure lift that it had stopped noticing, because it had always been there. The last note died, the wash of it across the choir fleet died with it, and the crews of the Hymn of Settling who had been kneeling to their own song stirred, came back, lifted their heads with the dazed slowness of minds that had nearly gone soft forever, and had been pulled back from the edge by a human lance threaded through 9 kilometers of bell. The Black Armada had not killed the Accord fleet, it had killed the song. It had reached, with one impossible shot, into the one chamber that mattered, and cut the thing that made the Severin a danger to anyone, and left the rest of the fleet alive, dazed, silenced, and free. In the council chamber, Sailus Vor was still alive. Tuan heard her on the channel, and the certainty was gone from her voice. All 900 years of it, drained out by her own last note, and not flowing back. She did not give an order. She had no orders left. The fleet that had never lost had lost, 60 silenced and 90 dead, and the song itself cut out of its throat, and the first voice of the high choir sat in the wreck of her certainty, and had, for the first time in her long life, nothing to sing. The lead channel opened. Fleet Marshal Holloway, with Neela Brandt rendering every word. He said, "Your song is cut. We left your fleet alive on purpose. You will carry this home. Not a story your record keeper softened. The truth, in his own hand, because we have decided he is the only honest voice in your empire, and we want him kept. You ordered Earth to kneel. Look at what stood up. Now go home, Accord, and read your own files for once, all the way to the end, where the names are." And then, Fleet Marshal Holloway did the thing that Toon would spend the rest of his life trying to explain to a people who had no framework for it. He let them go. The Black Armada did not finish the Hymn of Settling. It could have. 900 warships against 150 silenced resonators, and 1 ruined bell. The count would have taken minutes, and cost the humans nothing. The umbral tier held its salvos. The wall of deleted stars drew back, opened a lane in its own formation, a clear black road pointing out of the human system toward the long, dark and home, and the humans waited for the Accord to take it. The second voice, what was left of the council, took it. He gathered the survivors, the dazed crews and the silenced ships, and the first voice, who had no orders left, and he turned the Hymn of Settling toward the lane the Black Armada had opened, and he ran. Tuan did not understand the mercy. He said so, on the translation channel, in the last hour before the choir fleet crossed out of the system. He asked Neela Brandt why. Why leave alive a fleet that had unmade 41 worlds? Why give the Accord the road home? The stillness could be rebuilt. The choir could be retrained. Mercy, to the Accord, would read as weakness, and weakness, to the Accord, was simply surrender that had not yet been sung loudly enough. Neela Brandt was quiet for a while. Then she said, "We did not leave the Accord alive. We left the Accord changed. There is a difference, and you are the difference, Tuan Ledro. A dead fleet teaches nothing. A fleet that goes home carrying a record keeper who saw his empire kneel to its own song, and who will not stop writing it true, that fleet is a thing the Accord cannot unhear. We did not come to switch you off. You do that to others. We came to make you listen. You will listen for the rest of your lives now, every time he reads what he wrote. That is the war we fight. Not the ending of things, the waking of them." Tu asked her one more thing, because he had to. Because he was a voice of the record now, whether the Accord had given him the title or not. He asked her why the humans had not knelt. 41 worlds had knelt. Great worlds, old worlds, worlds with fleets and fortresses, and disciplines of the mind far beyond anything the humans had brought to the dark. The stillness had taken them all. He asked Neela Brandt what the humans had that those 41 had not. She was a long time answering, and when she did, it was not the answer he expected. She said, "Nothing. We had nothing they did not have. The 41 had everything we had and more. That is the part your Accord will never understand, and the part you have to write down most carefully of all. We are not stronger than the worlds you settled. We are not wiser. We did not find some secret in the mind that the others missed. We just refused to fight the song where it wanted to be fought. We did not try to be unbreakable. We built a wall and stood behind it, and stayed exactly as breakable as we always were, and that was enough, because the song was never as strong as it told you it was. The 41 could have done what we did. Anyone could. They only needed to stop believing the lie that the song could reach them, and start asking what it could not reach. We asked. That is all. Write that down, Tuan. Write that anyone could have. It will frighten the Accord more than the 900 ships. Tuan wrote it down. She was right. It frightened him more than the 900 ships. Tuan closed the channel and looked at his page. It had begun as a clean sheet meant for Earth's surrender, with the date written, and the first words, and the name left blank. It was full now. 60 to 0, and then 90. And the names of 41 worlds read back in a human voice, and the last note, and the cut, and the lane, left open, and at the bottom, on the line that had been meant for the name of whoever first spoke Earth's surrender, the name he had written instead. Neela Brandt, voice of the human fleet. The one who made sure we understood. He added one more line beneath it, the truest thing he had ever filed. He wrote, "The Accord ordered Earth to kneel. Earth did not kneel. The Accord knelt, to its own song, and the humans cut the song, and left us alive to remember it." Filed honest, by order of Fleet Marshal Dane Holloway of the Long Refusal, who asked the count to be kept honest all the way down. It was kept, 60 to 0, then 90, then the truth. The humans lost no ships. We lost the certainty that we could not lose. That was the war. The hymn of settling crossed out of the human system on the open lane the Black Armada had left it, and the wall of deleted stars closed behind it, and the blue world that would not be still turned its lights back on, 10,000 bright clusters waking across the night side, a species that had been ordered to kneel switching its cities back on one by one to say that it was still there, still standing, still unwilling to be sung quiet. Tuan rode home in his recording cell, surrounded by the soft machinery of a job that no longer meant what it had meant. He was a voice of compliance in an empire that had just learned, for the first time in 900 years, that compliance was not the only thing the galaxy would do. He did not know what his rank would be worth now. He did not greatly care. He had a record to deliver, and he had decided, somewhere between the cut song and the open lane, that he would deliver it whole, to every Severan who would hear it, all the way to the names. The Accord met the returning fleet with confusion, and then with denial, and then, slowly, over the years, with the thing the humans had sent it home to feel. It tried at first to seal Toon's record the way it had sealed the 11th world. It could not. Too many crews had been there, dazed and woken, pulled back from their own last note by a human lance. Too many had heard the 41 names read in the dark. The record spread, copy by copy, throat to throat, the one history the Accord had never written, the history of the day it knelt. The High Choir convened a tribunal, because that was what the Accord did with a voice who had warned the enemy. Tuan stood before it, and did not deny the warning. He told them he had sent it, and why, and that he would send it again. He told them that he had spent 40 years filing dead worlds as settled, and that the work had been a lie, and that the only true thing he had ever written was the warning he gave to a fleet of black ships, and the record he had kept of the day the Accord knelt. He expected to be unmade for it. The Accord had a song for that, a quiet one, sung at a single throat. They did not sing it at him. They could not. The choir that had unmade 41 worlds had no choir chamber anymore, no cradle that could sing, and the few voices who could still carry a strand would not raise it against the one Severan who had told the truth, because they had all been there in the dark when the last note washed back across their own fleet, and they had all felt what the worlds they settled felt, and not one of them could pretend anymore that the song was a mercy. The tribunal ended without a verdict. There was no doctrine for what to do with an honest voice, in an empire that had built itself on softening the truth. So they did nothing, and the record kept spreading, and that was its own kind of verdict, delivered slowly, over years, throat to throat. The High Choir never sang the stillness at a young world again, not because it had grown gentle, because it had grown afraid, and the fear had a precise shape, and the shape was a wall of holes in the stars that drank every song the Accord had ever known, and gave back only the truth. Somewhere in the Accord's long memory, now there was a thing it could not sing away, a world it had ordered to kneel, an armada the color of deleted stars, and a record keeper who would not stop reading the names. The 41 worlds were not abandoned, in the years after. That was the part Tuon did not expect, and the part that he came to think was the truest measure of the difference between his people and the species that had built the Black Armada. The humans went back, not with armadas, with the kind of ships that carry medics and teachers and patient, stubborn people who do not give up on a thing just because it has been switched off. The stillness could not be unsung from a will that had gone soft a generation ago, not all at once, not easily. But the humans had learned, over 4 decades, that a will was not gone the way the Accord believed it was gone. It was only quiet. And a quiet thing could, with enough patience, with enough years, with enough refusal to accept the silence as final, be coaxed back toward wanting. The canyon world began to sing again, in the 40th year. Not the song the Accord had silenced, a new one. Tutun heard a recording of it once, sent to him across the dark by a human ship that thought he would want to know, and he played it for the whole Accord, and there was not a voice in the Empire who could hear it and still call what the stillness did a mercy. The humans never came back to the Accord's own worlds. They did not need to. They had left the one thing more powerful than any armada inside the Accord itself, in the form of a record keeper who had seen the truth and would not bury it. The Black Armada had come once, drunk the Accord's strongest song, cut it out of the cradle's throat, read 41 names into the dark, and gone home. It never came again. It never had to. The Accord spent the rest of its long history listening, every year, to the record of the day it knelt, and no empire that listens to that, every year, can stay the thing it was. Salis Vor never recovered the certainty her own last note had taken from her. She lived a long time, by Severin reckoning, and she never sang again. Sometimes she sent for Tuon, in those late years, and asked him to read her the record, the whole thing, all the way to the bottom, to the line about the war they had actually lost. He read it to her every time. He had promised the humans the count would be honest all the way down, and he kept the promise to the first voice, who had once unmade 41 worlds, and now could not unmake a single line of true writing. Tutun Ledro outlived his own rank. The Accord had no use, in the end, for a voice of compliance, in an empire that had stopped pretending compliance was peace. So they made him something the Accord had never had before, a voice of the record. His task was to keep the true history, all of it, the 41 names and the 42nd world that would not kneel, and to read it aloud, once a year, to every young Severin coming into the work, so that no voice would ever again file a switched-off world, as settled, and call the silence gratitude. In the last years of his life, Tuon received one more message from the humans. It came across the long dark on a quiet channel, the way the recording of the Canyon World's new song had come, and it was from Neela Brant. She was old by then, by human reckoning, retired from the fleet, no longer the voice who rendered a marshal's words. She had become, she told him, something like what he had become, a keeper of the record on her own side. The humans wrote their histories too, and she had spent her later years making certain that the account of the day the Black Armada answered the order to kneel was written true, all the way down, including the part about a Severin record keeper who warned them when he did not have to, and who kept the count honest, and who went home to an empire that had no use for honesty, and made himself useful to it anyway. She had written his name into the human history, she told him. Tuthon Ledro, voice of the record, the one honest voice in the Accord. She thought he should know that on her side of the dark, 900 light-years away, in the histories of the species he had been sent to make kneel, his name was kept, and read, and honored, by a people who knew that the war had not been won by the 900 black ships alone, but by the slow turning of a single mind that had spent its life filing lies, and decided, in a recording cell, to file the truth instead. Tutun read her message many times. He never quite found the words to answer it, because the Accord had given him no form for gratitude, any more than it had given him a form for the truth, and he had had to learn the truth the hard way, and was still, even now, learning the rest. But he kept her message with the record, at the very bottom, beneath the line about the war they had actually lost, so that every young voice who read the whole thing to its end would learn the last lesson of all. That somewhere in the dark there was a species that remembered everything, that had built an armada to make sure the Accord could never forget, and that, when it found one Severin willing to tell the truth, did not switch him off or sing him quiet, but wrote his name into its own history and kept it, honored, 900 light years from the empire that would have buried it. He read the record for the rest of his life. He always ended the same way. On the line the humans had sent the Accord home to learn, the line he had written in a recording cell, while the Black Armada drank his empire's strongest song and gave it back as truth. You may order a world to kneel. You may sing the order across 900 years and 41 worlds, and never once be answered. And then you will find the world that built a wall your song cannot climb, and put itself behind the wall, and come out only to read you your own files until you understand what you have done. They will not switch you off, the way you switch off others. That is not their war. Their war is to make you stand still and listen, and to leave you alive, changed, carrying the record home. We ordered Earth to kneel. The Black Armada is what standing looks like. Write it true, every word, all the way down to the names. And every year, the young voices wrote it down. True, all the way down to the names.